So let's dive into some story time. I was hanging out at my house one afternoon when, I'm not joking, I suddenly felt like my skull was being crushed like a grape, and my hands flew to both sides of my face. Tears started streaming down my cheeks, and my husband's jaw dropped as he checked if I was okay. The weird thing was, as soon as it started, it came on pretty quickly. Within minutes, this worst headache of my life went away. It was weird, but I had no sort of long-term effects. So I sort of shrugged and I chugged some water and I kind of went on with my day. But when it happened again 2 weeks later, I took to Dr. Google.
And I just want to interject here and say that you are the person I would vote among all of the people I know most likely to go to Dr. Google in any medical instance, which I think was a really great thing that you did here. So just jumping in to add a little bit of flavor because
dude, I'm a great researcher and a patient advocate, and
excellent researcher.
Through the course of my life, I have nailed most things that I suspect. And like this instant,
a prolific user.
And it's come in handy because I cross-reference it and I'm usually right. I will just say that.
Especially in this instance, I'm glad you did that.
Right, because Dr. Google said, call your real doctor. So I basically went, okay. And that's when the nurses basically said I should go straight to the emergency department because that was typically indicative of a brain bleed. And I'm like, what? So I went to the ED and the scan showed I did not have a brain bleed. But the whole situation was odd enough that they sent me to a neurologist who promptly declared that this was a type of migraine headache. So this whole episode right now is not about migraines, but it's rather about what she said next, because she gave me 3 helpful things that I'm going to share as public service announcements. 1, you have to treat migraines immediately each time because migraines work on the neural pathways, and the more you let migraines linger, the more they'll come back with a vengeance. 2, that there are foods that trigger migraines. She's got a website, gotaheadache.com, that tells you what to avoid and what's okay to have, which I thought was helpful. And 3, migraines are often triggered by an excess of adrenaline. So she says, start clearing your life of things that contribute to adrenaline. And then she said the thing that this episode is all about. She said, you need to do less. And yes, I laughed out loud in the office because what midlife mom of 2 teenagers can possibly do less? But I really realized pretty quickly that I needed to take her seriously because she's a neurologist, right? And her whole point was pills and potions can only do so much for your health. It's not easy to change your lifestyle, but sometimes, oftentimes, things don't change unless we commit to the harder things that'll help us longer term. So if we can get over our serious, I can't get over my, busy selves, right? What do we mean when we say do less, when we say rest? Why is rest so important? How do we grapple with its significance in our sort of individual and also collective life as a society? And how do we do less?
Ooh, and I can't wait to get into this episode because this is a topic that I've been having discussions around increasingly more recently. And so we hope that you listen, share, and let us know what resonates with you.
You're listening to the podcast, What Do You Mean By That? We're your co-hosts, Sarah and me, Sasha. Okay, so let's start with the basics here, because what is rest, and is our understanding of it actually the best way that we're understanding it? In its most basic sense, according to Google's AI response, not to be confused with Dr. Google, the idea of rest is freedom from activity, a state of relaxation, whether of the body or mind, right? When I hear that, I think it's sort of safe to say that's the common understanding of rest. It's that we stop what we're doing in order to refuel. But in episode 248 of Dear White Women, our previous podcast, our guest, Kibi Anderson, really challenged our notions of what rest is. Because yes, I might have previously imagined a pause of real life infused with self-care. I'm thinking like a vacation or meditation, a bath, napping. And as lovely as all that sounds, that kind of idea of taking a break from your real life was one that for some folks, and I'm raising my hand here, maybe both of our hands here, it produces a sort of guilt that we're taking time for ourselves. So it didn't happen all that often, if we're honest.
And, as I was thinking about where this guilt comes from, right, I want to jump in and speak especially directly to those of you who have had lives grounded in the corporate world, right? Because we talk about capitalism a lot on this show. And I think that it's important to acknowledge this because I know you, right? I was you. And sometimes, Sarah, I feel like we speak a lot from our perspective as moms and like what we do now, right, as co-founders. And I 100% want us to keep doing that because there's nothing quite like mom guilt, too, right, when it comes to rest. And I also know how difficult a concept rest can be when corporate life has taught us to do really everything but rest. Because I think too, like my first year as a big law firm associate, and I remember being on this really challenging trial and where we were working basically around the clock. And I remember being in the elevator with a partner on that case and talking to him about vacation. And he was like, yeah, like, I like vacation, but I can never like, I don't know. There's nothing like, I can't go to a spa. I can't like get a massage. And in my head, I was like, what? Because that was like my dream of having enough time to like get a massage or go to the spa or something. And I was like, why not? And he's like, I can't relax. Like, I just, I'm thinking about all the things I need to do. Like a massage is never relaxing. I'm never going to do that. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, is this my life? Will I too hate massages and like hate the concept of, or struggle with the concept of relaxing, right? Because I was already in a world, and this is probably familiar to any of you who have been in the corporate world, where the expectation was that you answer emails immediately, right? You answer calls immediately. Like we had Blackberries. I'm totally dating myself right here, but we had Blackberries, right? And you had your Blackberry and you had your phone.
And if you don't know what a Blackberry is, Google it.
I know. That's for my kids. You can Google that. But the expectation was that you were available all the time, right? And even when I went part-time after having kids, I remember distinctly that one partner would always call me at 4:55 p.m. on a Friday. Like, and I wasn't even supposed to be working on a Friday, just to tell me like what he thought I should be thinking about over the weekend and working on the weekend. And so the expectation was that you were always on. There was never the capability to turn off your brain enough to rest, right? And that rest was something that was antithetical to success, and that rest was something that was selfish or against your client interest and against your own best interest, right? If you wanted to do well. And so when we talk about this framework, I want us to acknowledge all those things and then also think like what we learned about rest was probably wrong.
I think that's so true. And hopefully, in comparison to that time, with so many more conversations about burnout hitting the headlines, maybe we're starting to address this in a much more holistic way, understanding that humans are not robots. We do need to recharge at some place in order to live a sustainable life. And I think that's what we loved about what Kibi shared in that episode, because she also flipped this concept of rest around. She started looking at the data that she was tracking about her life and started asking things like, what are the things I've done that have actually made me feel alive and calm and energized? Like she was looking at what she was doing, not the absence, not the pause, not just the doing of nothing. What are the things that she could continue to do? And so it felt sort of revolutionary to focus not on this absence of activity, but on what feelings that certain activities can bring us. This idea of like, what if rest is actually defined by anything that gives us joy? And on top of that, what if it doesn't have to be something we do ourselves, like a bath or this meditation moment, but like, what if it can be done in community if community is what gives you joy? Like walk with a friend, go listen to live music in your community, whatever it is. I feel like this is an important conversation to have right now because let's be honest, the big picture of our society is exhausting for many, many, many of us. We're fighting fascism, trying to hold on to democracy in the face of a person who seems to want to be an authoritarian dictator, who's put into place people and machinations that make it, that's not even the right how to pronounce it, but like the mechanisms that make it possible, like to undo the systems that our forefathers set up several hundred years ago. So on top of that, while at least some of us are getting our kids ready to go back to school, we're preparing new routines, remembering how to be really aggressive chauffeurs, put food on the table and get work done through all of it, right? There's a lot. There is a lot, and it's overwhelming, and it's tempting to bury our heads in the sand, and a lot of people are doing that. But we have to remember that everything we do matters, right? Say you have a hugely influential platform or the ability to participate in a legal case that changes the tide. Yes, using those platforms and skills matter. And for the rest, people who feel like they can't do anything and then simply don't do anything extra to resist, that matters too. Because what if several million of us do that? Who's going to stand up to vote against this, to use our money against this, to stand up in opposition to all that happens and remain silent? So doing nothing is a choice that has impact too. I would argue we can't let there be a vacuum. And there are so many smaller things that each and every one of us can do that matters. It's so easy to lose sight of it because we think about these big, big things, but it's the little things, community things that matter, which is why I want to highlight a post from Whitney Elise of The Reclaimed. In it, she says, it's easy to lament about what we cannot do, but instead we can focus on what we can do that makes a difference. Things like
donate to or volunteer at your local food pantry or feeding organization.
Donate to mutual aid.
Learn about upcoming elections, especially local elections.
We have episodes about that. Support independent journalism.
Along with that, supporting small businesses.
And supporting your local library.
If you're thinking about other ways to donate and support, what about your local domestic violence shelters?
And so important to regularly contact your representatives.
Along with that, regularly attending community meetings.
And with all of that, talk to your friends and family about issues that are important to you.
Yeah, and think about that also more broadly, right? Tap into that community, not just friends and family, but even the larger community, especially when you're overwhelmed.
Yeah, I mean, because it's so easy to shrink into ourselves, right? We got to go back and lean into each other. And I think this is an important one. Stay informed, but not consumed by political developments.
Yes. And some things that seem basic, but maybe aren't, right? Like rest, drink water, exercise, eat well.
And find some joy, right? This was literally on our list. Even more people are saying rest and joy.
And Sarah, you were talking about sort of the individual activities, right, of rest versus the community, or thinking of expanding that view to include community. And I want to add in that a lot of these options also get you in community with people who are not like you, right? Which is so important these days as we are increasingly sort of siloed into our own beliefs and our own identities. And especially a lot of what we've been talking about has been in relation to how we feel about the politics that are going on right now. And how we have increasingly leaned into our own political identities and our own circles really continues to keep us isolated and unable to really challenge ideas. So the more we can be in community with people who are local to us, who may believe and think differently, the greater we can build that community in the end.
You know, I want to add a sidebar here because I had the total fortune and privilege of moderating a conversation at the American Psychological Association just a few weeks ago. And it was the session on burn bridges and broken trust. And they literally addressed the role of psychology in the massive political polarization we have right now. And some of the things that they suggested we do really had echoes of the conversation we had with Colin Seal on our podcast about how to become better critical thinkers. Part of it was remembering that as soon as you say words like they and other people and group them together, you're not forming community. So we have to watch our language. And things like, if you can't articulate the other quote, other side of from your political beliefs, you haven't done the work to truly understand, because they are very deeply also human and concerned about these issues. And so you want to take the time to connect. And there are organizations out there that let us connect on political conversations, like Braver Angels, for example.
And I think words are so important. I'm glad you brought that up, because I was on the topic of psychology. I was listening to this podcast that was talking about misinformation and how we process information differently depending on how we see ourselves, right? What is important to us in our identity. And they were talking about the usage of words. For example, like when you say mother hurts child, right? Short sentences. Mother typically is seen as good. Child is seen as like a good connotation. Hurts is like a negative thing. So it's really hard. It's like a cognitive dissonance, right? To try and make sense of those. If you take that and replace mother with Democrat, right? Democrat hurts child. Your political identity is going to change how you hear that sentence, right? Because for a Republican now, especially in our polarized, like really separate political identities, the connotation, it is not going to be a cognitive dissonance because that is going to be taken as truth, right? It's going to be like, oh, yes, Democrat is a negative thing. Hertz is a negative thing. I understand how this is happening. Where for Democrats hearing that, it's going to be that cognitive dissonance. So even how we process information now is so different and keeps us apart. So the more that we can challenge what our notions are of these political identities, be able to talk to each other, the stronger we can build community, which is going to be what saves us in the end, right?
Totally. Totally. How is what we're saying right now resonating with you, Misasha? Like, how do you incorporate rest while continuing to take action?
Yeah, I mean, I think like part of what I've had to do is relearn like everything I learned in the corporate world, right?
Yeah. Yes.
But also to be like very realistic. I think, you know, as I get into my late 40s, right? Like I am really realistic about, or I try to be really realistic about what I can and cannot handle. Part of it is like, for me, staying informed but not consumed by political developments has been something that I have really been trying to work on as like my own form of mental rest, right? As I work towards like the changes, what I can do, right? From our platform, from a legal perspective, from education.
I was going to say, like, how that shows up in real life is I notice a shift. I would say 5 years ago, you and I used to exchange links and articles and texts about politics all the time. There's a very clear division now. And like, I love that I don't think we even talked about it, but it just has morphed. And that's a practical way that these boundaries can show up in your life. How are you consuming it? When are you consuming it? With whom are you having these discussions? And is it organized in a way that like gives you the space to process healthily?
Well, and if you're like me, maybe you subscribe to like everything, right? Like after the November election, you're like, okay, there are like 25 issues that I really am concerned about. And I've realized like because it is such an onslaught of terrible things every day, I have to focus on like a couple of things that are really important to me. So that's also been a way that I've been able to step back to be able to show up when I need to. What about you, Sarah?
I think there's two different things. Yes, the headache neurologist situation forced me to also see in my late 40s, like, I've got to listen. I've got to stop pushing and buying into this system that like productivity, being busy, having no time, suffering is like some badge of honor, and be okay doing less and understanding that my body and my brain really need it. And there's nothing wrong with living life in this way. And in fact, it's allowed me to, I've seen the benefits of it. It's allowed me to be more creative and be more present. And so I'm leaning into that, and I assign sort of gifts to my future self. You and I have shared this before, but like whether it's a massage or a forest bathing episode or, you know, experience that comes through the local parks, or, you know, having stronger routines in my morning and my evening, I have given myself a lot more space in my calendar and a lot more routines that work for what my brain and body need to disengage, be present, and like be more full of joy and awe and the things that bring me to life. And then on top of that, we just had an alleyway happy hour to kick off the start of the school year. And the neighbors said, okay, when are we getting back to it? We write postcards together. So vote forward. We'll order a whole bunch. We'll have like postcard parties on my kitchen island. And it's really fun and it's really meaningful. And we get to have conversations during it while we're making a difference. So that plus, you know, joining an organization called the Immigrant Protection Teams and doing what I can and learning from people who've been here before with protests, being part of these local communities in real life and also like in a way that I know makes a difference has been huge for how I am continuing to stay connected and doing this work in community as opposed to feeling like I'm isolated and having to battle it all myself.
I love that. I think the focus on communities, you know, as we've been talking about, right, is so important. And I want to add like one little asterisk here because I think, and I see this on social media sometimes, right? I think it's also important not to weaponize rest, right? And let me explain that, because I think some people may be working 3 to 4 jobs, right, to stay afloat in our increasingly difficult economic times. And sometimes rest is a privilege that not all of us have. And I think, in the ways that we've been discussing it, maybe rest looks very different, right, when you're working around the clock and you've got kids and and this, our increasingly difficult economic situation makes it, seem fairly impossible. So when we're thinking about rest, I feel like we should also keep in mind that we shouldn't be blaming or shaming those who cannot afford to do that right now, or who can only afford to do that in ways that may not seem to us like rest, right? And along with that, if we hold the privilege to be able to rest, how can we share that ability with others? And I think some of that goes back to donating and volunteering in our communities and giving support for people who may need it, right? But that's something I've been thinking about along with, the concept of rest and what does rest mean and how that looks different for everyone.
I love that. Thank you so much for making that point, because you can see in society and headlines, some people really, bash others for, they don't understand what it means to work so hard and not being able to rest. I totally acknowledge the privilege we have. And I love that the more we do that work to free up our own mindset from this need to push, the more we'll also, I think, have grace for other people and feel compelled to allow that same level of access to human need to recharge, so that you can keep going in the longer run. I love it. Now, I will say, if this is not enough for you, I have one more perspective to share on why it's important to both keep doing things and rest. And it's because rest is actually an act of protest. So in the book, Rest is Resistance, from the founder of the NAP ministry, Tricia Hersey, she makes the point that we as a country were founded on exploitative capitalism. Right. If you know the role that slavery had in establishing the wealth for white landowning people owners, this is true. And the vestiges of that exploitative capitalism, which has since basically stripped out the social safety nets that a lot of other countries have, and ultimately allowed for this billionaire class to emerge, which, let's be very honest, it tends to rely on the labor of people making minimum wage, sometimes not even a livable wage to make their money. Ultimately, that same system, I think, has us believing that we have to push ourselves to the point of suffering in order to make it. And I loved the idea put forward in this book, in short, which is the idea that snatching ourselves out of this state of suffering and reestablishing our right to rest, live a gentler life, is a way of protesting extreme capitalism. It's a way of just saying, you can't have us. And it feels at this point in history to push back in this way as a sort of counterculture, it feels incredibly correct. There is no guilt that I feel when it's framed in this way. And so I think the point of what we're saying is to rest with intention, right? Figure out what it means to you, do it, and make it part of your life instead of a break from your life, so you can keep moving forward in a way that you want to move in. Right. And hopefully it's to continue supporting one another as people, like you said, Misasha, also, and giving each other basic respect and dignity and care. And so I hope you let us know how it goes for you.
And to learn more about how to be a better human, listen to our recent episodes on how to be a better listener, the difference between being nice and being kind, on improving your critical thinking skills, and how all of these play into the politics of our times. And we can't say it enough. Please share with us what resonates with you. And finally, stay tuned, because next episode, we kick off fall with a special return guest in a not-to-be-missed, honest, and very real conversation.
You've been listening to What Do You Mean By That? A show dedicated to being better humans and getting loud for all of us. Hat tip to Sarah's daughter for the logo, and huge thanks to Misasha's son for our incredible theme music. Find out more and subscribe to our newsletter at whatdoyoumeanbythat.com. Because as always, it's all of us or it's none of us.